Hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. So nice to have you with us here on this sunshiny but crisp fall, almost winter morning here in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. I'm joined here by my regular friends, Gregg Braden. Hi, Gregg. How are you?
John, I'm good. It's good to be with the crew here again, and we've just had our first big snowfall of the year here in the high desert, northern New Mexico. So it's starting to look a lot like winter.
Yeah. Penny Kelly, how are things in Michigan?
Same big snowfall. It's very cold. Other than that, everything is good. So
Sounds like Michigan in the wintertime to me.
yeah, it is.
Kingsley Dennis from the UK. Hi, Kingsley.
Hi, John, Penny, and Greg. Good to be back with you after those travels. All good from the UK. Thanks.
Well, thank you all and for being here. And we're going to spend the next hour plus talking about some of the deep issues related to this big change that's coming downstream. And in particular, what we're going to talk about is why in the world is what's going on now. As I suggested to you earlier when I responded to the earlier kind of comments that we went around the table, there is an amazing and growing a number of things that are going on here that are, in one sense, illogical. They're irrational. The whole thing is just really hard to make sense of if you think about it. If you don't think about it, you don't have a problem, of course, and that's the idea. That's what they'd like you to do. But if you think about it, then what it keeps raising is these deep kind of almost existential kind of questions about who we are and what is this and why, how do you get out of the back end of this thing? And it's a low-grade drug trip kind of almost that's going on here writ large, and where everything is up for grabs and floating around in one way or another. I have, in the last couple of months, been exposed to a number of kind of new kind of ideas or inputs or efforts that are going on that raises the question about why in the world is this going on now? You know, the Raw people, the Law of One, those books, which have influenced a lot of people with their basic ideas, have suggest that there are these kind of regular times in history, like big times in history, big periods in history, when there is what they call a harvesting, when the time and everything is just right, and there is kind of a creaming of the top of the folks who are people on this planet who are ready to kind of move on to somewhere else, and it happens on not necessarily a predictable basis, but kind of an episodic basis. At the same time, I remember once on a trip in from the airport with Lee Carroll, who was the channel for Cryon, and we were talking and they were trying to explain to me, he and Monica were trying to explain to me what the significance of December the 21st, 2021 was all about. And they said it was the marker. We moved across the marker. And I said, well, what do you mean the marker? What is the marker? What is this thing? And I responded to them and it said it needs two things here in order for this to be date specific. And one of them is that there has to be some kind of a cosmic alignment. Otherwise, that's what gives you the date, right? That gives you the opportunity, the window that opens up for this particular thing to happen. So there has to be some kind of cosmic alignment. Maybe that's associated with where we are in terms of the center of the galaxy as we're moving around. I don't know. But in any case, that needs the window kind of opens up. And then the second kind of component of this is that there needs to be appropriately prepared people to then be able to jump through the window, if you will, or through the door. That those who have prepared themselves for this kind of evolutionary jump then get moved on through that time. And I don't believe that the Ra people proposed a particular date or any particular time when this was going to happen, but it raises the question as you look around right now and say, what in the world is going on now, and why is it now? There's a third kind of component to this, and this is this new organization called the Light System, TLS, which is kind of the front man for that is a guy named Jason Shirka. And Jason Shirka is he's not a member of the Light System. He is the spokesperson for them. So he's merely carrying the water, carrying the message for them. And what they say is that they're an organization that's been under the covers for thousands of years. They've existed all over the world. It's now time for them to come forward. They're like a white hat CIA outfit that, is working on behalf of humanity in this whole transition. They're not all humans. Some of them are non-humans. I mean, it's big and kind of interesting. And if it's real, it's an extraordinary kind of thing. But then the question is, why in the world do you decide you're going to come up and make yourself known to everybody right now? Why not 10 years ago? Why not 10 years from now? I mean, what is it about right now that says now is the time to start exposing people to the possibility that there's been an inside kind of effort, very organized effort of very sophisticated kind of people and capabilities that have been trying to move this all along, and we've never known about it. We've always assumed that, maybe the aliens would come from somewhere else at some time and kind of help us along or tell us what to do or expose us to some new ideas that would give us kind of direction about where we all ought to go. I mean, so the question is, why now?
There are layers upon layers that we can have this conversation. There are cosmic events that we know are driving shifts. For example, a massive is happening right now, massive influx of cosmic radiation that influences the core of our planet. It influences geology. It influences climate change. It's actually driving climate change as the oceans heat from underneath. There's a whole conversation there, and there are other cycles that are converging at the same time. When we start talking about soul harvests, there are religious and spiritual implications, certainly in that terminology. And I think it comes up in other traditions, Judeo-Christian traditions, for example, talk about the rapture, which is kind of the same sense as the soul harvest. So I think what we're looking at is a reset on many levels, and we're looking at those who are aware of that reset jockeying for power and control to be in the best possible position for the other side of the reset. And I think that is what's driving a lot of the wars that we're seeing right now. In the religious traditions, there are certain events that must happen before we can complete this reset, before we can have a soul harvest, before we can have a rapture. And I think you're seeing a very concerted effort. People try to separate these ancient mystical traditions and spirituality and religion from politics in the everyday world. And I think what we're finding is the reality is those traditions are actually driving the politics and the political decisions of the everyday world, all moving us toward this convergence point that has so many different names. And we talked about this in the Q&A part of the conversation here in this program just a few minutes ago. I think that the soul harvest or the rapture aspect is being driven by the way that we choose to respond to what it is that the world is showing us, whether or not it's not so much what we do, John, it's what we become. And I said this in a video not long ago, and I think it was such a bizarre concept. Many people missed the point that I was trying to make. They say, war is war. And that's true on the physical level, war and destruction. But on a spiritual level, what that war makes us into, does it force us to betray our truest nature and become beings of hate and fear? Or are we able to prosecute a war without betraying our truest nature? And that would determine where we are in a soul harvest. That determines where we are in the rapture. So all of these things, I think, are deeply interrelated, and they're all happening now, because now is the convergence of the cycles, the physical cycles being driven by the cosmic cycles, and the spiritual cycles that have been referenced in our most ancient and cherished spiritual tradition. So it's not random. It is happening now. And I think there are different levels of awareness. I'm not suggesting that every politician or every member of the United Nations or World Economic Forum certainly knows what we're talking about now. A lot of them are pawns in carrying out the events, but they really don't understand their relationship to those events in the world. But this is what our ancestors have told us. Just a last point, the Mayan calendar, a lot of people think that was all about the year 2012. The 2012 was a cosmic marker. December 21st, was that solstice.
Oh, yeah.
But what the Mayans show us very, very clearly is that there is a 36-year buffer between the end of one cycle and the beginning of the next. 2012 was the midpoint in that buffer. So 18 years before that was 1994. 18 years after that is the year 2030. And I think we're seeing a push for the alignments to occur politically, economically, socially, religiously, spiritually, before that 2030 timeframe. So I'll stop there. We can go on. We can talk. I mean, there's so much we can talk about here, but I think that's what's driving it.
A couple of things. Yes. And I was speaking about 2012, not 2021. It's the dyslexia issue.
Yes, it is the kind of crux question of our time. And there's a lot of data out there, which is now, coming in and kind of can be collated. And it's quite overwhelming. I would say, it would help us if we take a kind of perspective that this reality, this life that we're in, is within a cosmological framework that is based on a kind of developmental or evolutionary scale. So if we consider that we're in a cosmological framework and life on this planet is part of an evolutionary kind of step gradation, then at certain points you have to reach a point where you move from different gradations and steps. And I think that's where we're heading now. And I think because it's such a long process, it's been documented in the past to forewarn people for the future step. Now, I mean, just to take the evolutionary Darwinian metaphor, which we know is not totally correct, but there was a stage when the fish left the water, the seas, and walked on land. What gave them the impotence to make that move? There had to be some kind of drive. And as I've said before, did the philosophy of the fish ever help it to become an amphibian? When you're in the old state, you don't know what the new state is, but there's drivers that have to force that shift. And before that shift occurs, you need a certain tipping point. So, you get certain factors which create preparation. And they can be geophysical preparation in the strata of the level of intelligence or consciousness within the beings of the planet that can aid that shift. And so I think one of our drawbacks is that we tend to get conditioned with the idea that the forward movement is linear, and not cyclical. And of course, if you look at history, there's always been grand cycles. And if you've looked at, the great, the cycles from the Hindu yugas and the Vedanta philosophy have talked about the cycles. They tie in with, of course, cosmological cycles, which we've discussed. And, I would point someone to look at the work of Walter Crittenden in his book, The Lost Star of Myth and Time, where, if we're in a binary system, then when our solar system goes around this binary orbit, then there's times when you're further away from certain kind of solar forces, and then you're nearer. And these create greater impacts on the planet. Of course, we have history. And if you look at some of the work of Edgar Cayce, and he said, for example, the fall of Atlantis was due to, the cataclysms were related to a misuse of technology. So just because we have a forward movement in technology, it doesn't mean that we're going into that technology. That technology could be part of the evolutionary cul-de-sac or part of the triggers that actually bring us down. So actually, it may be that because we see this whole buildup of these technologies and the disruptive technologies and the negative side of technologies, it could be a sign that we're coming to this breakdown. If we look at, again, the cyclic of civilizations in history, when they come to the fall, or the collapse of civilization is often because of there's greater kind of, there's the loss of morality. There's a great debauchery in the societies at the peak of collapse, and that could be a sign. And we can see the sign of moral collapse and debauchery and the warfare in our global civilization now. So we can see that as a sign. And, you know, obviously Oswald Spengler, Arnold Toynbee have looked at these cycles. I would also suggest people to look at an English author, historian, mystic called Nicholas Hager. And I just pulled his book off my shelf before we started talking, a 900-page book on the history of 25 civilizations called The Fire and the Stones. Stones representing physical society and civilization, the fire representing the metaphysical fire. And his thesis is that the cycles of civilization show you when you're moving towards a collapse or a reset, is that there's a loss of the metaphysical fire. We've kind of been alienated from our, let's say, source or our sacred connection. And a civilization that reaches that point needs a reset. And if not, it'll be pushed into a reset. So we have to ask ourselves, can we see our human civilization global today at a loss or lacking the metaphysical fire or the connection to the sacred? And, you know, and of course, we've had all these cycles of like 12,000 years kind of geophysical cataclysms that bury civilizations. So this is all going on. But the question is, in every of these closing of the cycles or the transitions or the resets. Now, I think the reset is a modern term because of all the, you know, the computer terminology and that, where you think we can just press a button, everything gets reset. I think what it's referring to is that, you know, a certain time then kind of collapses in on itself, and there's a window of opportunity whereby a certain section then starts to be the seed for the next. And we've talked about this before in our talks. So the question is, of course, what section or what kind of strata of the species in any particular time steps into the new evolutionary mode? Now, you mentioned harvesting and you know, the law of one and Ra. That they suggest, of course, the difference between how many people are working for in an unselfish way for their community and others, which is called service to others. And there's the strata or the percentage of those working in selfish ways, service to self, of course, and they go down the kind of non-evolutionary path. So it could be right now we're seeing on the planet there's a certain percentage of those who are going through the kind of tyrannical control mode. They are service to self. And they, you know, according to the law of one, if they can get to like 90% of service to self, they can create a service to self future. But of course, the service to others, which means the human goodness, the human sharing and cooperation, only needs 51%. You know, you don't need as much light as you do darkness because light is naturally expansive. So the question is, if there can be enough awareness in human consciousness field and the human condition that we are moving towards a whole new gradation of the evolutionary developmental path, if there can be over 51%, then this will make sure that there won't be an evolutionary cul-de-sac on this planet. But yeah, we're at that coalescence of time.
Other populations of people look at life a little bit differently. And when they are, I'm going to say, planning anything, I don't care what it is, they're looking at what forces are in play, what forces are in the neighborhood of, or the location of whatever it is you're trying to carry out. And all of the, and we know that it only takes a little frequency change or insertion to make a big impact. Maybe, not instantly. I like Kingsley's idea of a reset button. We are so used to being able to push a button and have instant gratification that we don't really, we're not patient with our own process of evolution. But a couple of things that I would point out. Number one, everything in reality is evolutionary. It has a cycle, it has a life cycle, and it returns to source eventually. For some things, it's a big cycle. For other things, it's not so big. The process, the human has a cycle, and that cycle of becoming, I love that term, becoming, that cycle of becoming is very much impacted by the frequencies that that individual experiences, runs into, or has put upon them, or surrounds him or herself with over the course of a lifetime. That frequency is evident and obvious in somebody's tone of voice. And if they're yelling at you and carrying on like this, you're going to hear the tone and back away from that frequency before you ever even hear the words. You can say to somebody, but sweetheart, you're dying. And they will hear that tone before they take in the fact that you're dying. So the tone is the frequency. So we have this evolutionary process. We are, part of my work here is to help make that exact step that that both Kingsley and Gregg mentioned. We're evolving into something. We do have, I don't like to say this, we do have something of a simulation happening. Mother Nature is the reality. The technological thing is the simulation. It simulates reality, or it simulates nature, but it's not really very natural. So we have now stepped into, I'm going to say the next dimension. We've some of us, and maybe Jason Shirka as well, have been working and really with the intention, I guess I'll just say it, with the intention of shifting the consciousness in order to take advantage of the energies that are present and flooding into this time. I'm not an astrologer, I'm not an astronomer, etc., but in my own conversations and meetings with my own people, that is very, very key. What kinds of frequencies and the timing of that is absolutely essential. So here we are, we've just stepped into 4D. We're still, flopping back and forth. In Owen, I think it's Owen Waters' terms, he wrote a book some years ago called The Shift, and it's been interesting. He took the work of Claire Graves and he said, here's the memes. It was the first time I heard the word meme. And he said, here's what we're moving into. And he called it tier 1, tier 2. And let's assume there's other tiers. That tier 2 is characterized by a move into sort of an awakening, intuition, creativity, getting clear about what is really happening. That and he only identified the first 2 stages of tier 2. I came here with a knowledge of all 6 of those stages and what they are. And I see that we're moving along very nicely, and that the energies that the planet itself, the solar system, is moving into are critical at this point. I just had a whole experience back in February of getting upgraded in order to make it easy for me to physically manage the higher frequencies without difficulty etc. And there's still a part of me, the human side, that is very, it's like, you know, show me proof. My engineering side is, I need some proof. So I had, after the discovery of these factors coming together around November 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, I was thinking, well, you know, I'd really like to see if there's something that is spectacular or something, you know, give me a sign. And lo and behold, on November 17th and 18th and into the 19th, I had some spectacular energetic shifts that it just involved levitation, among other things. So we are moving into a period of time where those who are awake can take advantage of those higher frequencies. And if you have a service to others kind of mindset, that then you know how to help others, you know what to say, when to say, what not to say, and you can promote healing and promote the evolution, because it's all about evolution. You either evolve or you devolve, period. Nothing stays the same. And we are there's a whole bunch of factors coming together. I can't name those. I'm going to say energetic factors. Some are cosmological, some are consciousness. Some of those I have deliberately created for myself or others. And I think we are already at the third stage of tier 2 in this system of evolution to become new humans, new forms, beings. The next step is turning into light. So, or becoming light. And so Gregg's question about what are we becoming? You know, if you succumb to the ugliness of war, that's one thing, but you can still do your duty to your country and not fall victim to that meanness and that cruelty, and to fight that war with honor, etc. And it's, you know, you see that in some of the ancient texts of Sanskrit. Yep, you got to do this. It's a part of your growth. So here we are. We're moving up into this next tier. I think we've got one foot in that world, and this is the time to take advantage of that. And I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much. Delightful, provocative conversation. I appreciate you guys all very much. So I just want to remind our viewers that this comes to you from the Arlington Institute, which is a little think tank that I started 35 years ago. We're now located in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia, a little resort town just about 100 miles down the road from Washington and Baltimore. And we hold forth with a whole bunch of different kind of things and programs and different kind of projects that we've got. We have transition talks where we have speakers every month that come, and both Gregg and Penny have been regular participants in that. We've got a great lineup every month. We have somebody really interesting. As a matter of fact, Frank Jacob is going to be with us here Saturday after next, who's coming over from Germany, who is kind of an expert on Project Looking Glass, this whole supposed technology that the government has got squirreled away somewhere and been using to be able to look literally into the future and bring back information to decide what kind of policies they ought to implement in order to control us some more, I guess. But in any case, that will be interesting. And it's followed by Jim Kunstler, James Howard Kunstler in January. Anyway, there's a wonderful lineup, and you can find out all about it on transitiontalks.org and find out all of what we're doing here at the Arlington Institute at arlingtoninstitute.org. And so we hope that you'll come back and be with us. We do this every couple of weeks, and we're kind of, I don't know what happens around Christmas time and whether we're going to have a problem with that, but in general, we're here fortnightly, and so we hope that you'll come back. So let's finish up here by running around the table like we do and say, what do you think is going to happen in the next couple of weeks? Kingsley, what's your guess?
Well, John, I mean, it's getting increasingly difficult because since we're in a perma crisis, as I mentioned, anything's possible. So rather than trying to predict a particular thing, I think there's a theme which is really kind of, cropping up more and more, which is being kind of brought in is the idea of the cyber attack. And I think we're seeing a lot of instances, where now you see certain banks are having a 1-day offline cyber attack, traffic air control. It's coming more and more frequent. So I can't say that there'll be a specific thing, but I think we're going to see a kind of rise in the sporadic cyber disturbances, which they may or may not admit, but I think they're trialing certain cyber disturbances.
Yeah, I think you're right. What I've heard most lately is that the whole reason why we're trying to get a war started with Iran is to have the ability to blame some kind of a false flag cyber event on Iran so that we can then tie down the populace increasingly. Greg, what do you think?
Next 2 weeks, I think we are going to see an unprecedented level of the use of fifth generational warfare to drive the opinions in terms of policy in the Middle East for America, our relationship to Israel, our relationship to Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and amazingly, I'm amazed at how successful the campaign has been to fracture American society and to divide families and friends and businesses based on the misinformation, the disinformation, the false narratives mixed in with grains of truth to create the public opinion and the policy that we're seeing on college campuses. We're seeing it in our political candidates in the run-up for the presidential election. So I think we're going to see that really heat up in the next 2 weeks, because it's American energy, money, and weapons that are keeping a lot of this going in the Middle East.
Absolutely. Penny?
Well, a couple things that I've been watching. What I've been tracking is this very slow turtle-like awakening process to what I'm going to call the games being played around money and around politics. The people who have not been paying attention, what I see over the next 2 weeks is that there's a bit of like a jump in that, an expansion of the number of people that are aware of the propaganda and the attempt to totally distract. So that's one thing. I think another thing that is going to feed that is the decision by New York, the state of New York, to create detention camps for some sort of supposed virus or illness or whatever. And they're going to try and push that quietly, but I see that coming to people's minds and them saying, wait a minute here, this is getting too crazy. And then the other thing is, I see, maybe not till after the 2 weeks, but I see this rising virus push for people and animals, this push to frighten people around. We've got a new problem, we've got a new virus, we got a new illness, and it's devastating. They're going to do the same thing they did before. So
I think so. I think in the next couple of weeks that you're going to probably see an increasing kind of failure of in the banking system. It seems the best assessment that I've seen is that the policymakers have had to make a choice between either supporting the dollar or supporting the banking system, and there was no other option, and they decided to support the dollar. And they run the interest rates up, then what that does is cause the banks to lose the kind of income that they would generate from loans that would allow them to kind of deal with the obligations that they have. And so there's this almost certain kind of erosion of the system that way. So I suspect that we'll see more of that in the next couple of weeks. But so I invite you all to come back and be with us again. All of us, all of you nice folks who are watching this from all over the world. Let me tell you, I very much, and all of us appreciate the very kind words and the comments that you make and you send along. There are a lot of folks who have made it very clear that our little program that we get together here has been very helpful to them. And we really appreciate that, and particularly in this holiday season, when we're all thinking about gratitude and gifts and stuff. It's really important that we not forget and appreciate all of what you all send us and the response that you generate. That's very kind of you all. So thank you all, and thank you, Penny and Kingsley and Gregg. Great to have you with us, and we'll come back and try to do this again in another couple of weeks.